or across channels.
You can watch the last few minutes of this discussion online as we take you now to the floor of the Senate, gaveling back in today after a week-long Memorial Day break, resuming work on the Paycheck Fairness Act dealing with gender-based pay discrimination, and at 5 Eastern, debate on the nomination of Timothy Hillman to be a federal district court judge in Massachusetts, with a vote scheduled for 5:30.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, whose presence is the source of our strength, as we return from the Memorial Day recess, we pause to thank you for those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms we enjoy. Please hold all our servicemen and women in your strong arms, protecting them from dangers seen and unseen. Bless the families of our service members. Fill their lives with your peace and provision, strengthening them to trust in your mighty power to sustain them. Lord, help our senators this day to live lives worthy of your grace. May they discover that real fulfillment comes when they seek to glorify you. Place your hand on the shoulders of our lawmakers, reminding them that you are with them and will guide them. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 4, 2012. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to calendar number 410, S3220.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to the consideration of S3220, a bill to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 to provide more effective remedies to victims of discrimination in the payment of wages on the basis of sex and for other purposes.
Mr. President, we're now on the motion to proceed to this measure called the Paycheck Fairness Act. At 5 o'clock this afternoon, the Senate will vote on the nomination of Timothy Hillman to be a United States District Judge for Massachusetts. There will be 30 minutes of debate at that time, led by Senator Leahy. At 5:30, there will be a roll call vote on confirmation of the Hillman nomination. Mr. President, S.J. Res. 41 is now due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
Senate Joint Resolution 41, expressing the sense of Congress regarding the nuclear program of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Mr. President, I would object to any further proceedings with respect to this joint resolution.
The objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, back in 1963, when Congress passed the Equal Pay Act, women at that time working full-time took about 59 cents for every dollar paid to their male co-workers doing the same job. And while passage of that landmark legislation helped narrow the pay gap, today American women still only take home 77 cents on the dollar compared to their male colleagues for doing the exact same job. Jane working at a job gets 77 cents. Jack working at that job gets $1. That's why women are concerned about how they're being treated. It's simply not fair that any woman working the same hours in the same job should make less money. Often this inequity stretches over decades, and many women don't even know they're victims. It took one woman, a Las Vegas woman, 15 years to find out that she made $20,000 per year less than her male colleagues, although she did the same work, worked just as hard. That's $20,000 a year over 15 years. She was paid about 66 cents on the dollar compared to her male co-workers, despite being a top sales associate with a Las Vegas payroll company. Over the decade and a half she worked there, her employers cheated her out of literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in pay. Why? Because she's a woman. Her story, though, has a happy ending. She got a lawyer, settled out of court, and now has gone on with her own successful business. But many victims don't have that happy ending. Many victims of years or even decades of gender-based pay discrimination have nothing to be happy about. The average woman who works full-time year-round in Nevada makes $7,300 less than a man doing the same job. And I'm sure, Mr. President, it's about the same in Connecticut. Although the wage gap has narrowed in the last half-century since Congress declared women entitled to equal pay for equal work, gender discrimination remains a serious problem in the workplace. That's why Democrats overcame Republican obstructionism last Congress to pass the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. It was the second thing we did that entire very, very productive Congress. Why did we do it? Because Lilly Ledbetter had worked for years and years doing the same job as her male counterparts. She finally found out one day that they're being paid a lot more money than she is for doing the same thing. And she went to court. The court said the statute of limitations is run. Now, the presiding officer is one of our most gifted lawyers we have in the Senate. Long-time Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, understands the law very well. That case was so unfair. Lilly Ledbetter, because she didn't bring her case soon enough, she didn't know she was being cheated. But they said you had a certain period of time to bring this, a matter of 3 years, I think it was, and even though it had been well more than a decade that she had been working there, she was out of luck. So that's what we did. We passed the Lilly Ledbetter legislation. Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. I've met her on a number of occasions. Boy, she's got a lot of spunk in her, and rightfully so, because most people would not have fought. She took that to the United States Supreme Court, where she lost there. And that's why we had to do something legislatively. This law, the Lilly Ledbetter legislation, makes it possible for victims of gender discrimination to successfully challenge unequal pay, even if the discrimination has been going on for years and years. But despite that achievement in that last Congress, there's still a great deal of work to be done to ensure American women earn comparable pay for a day's work. So it's crucial we pass the bill now before this body, the Paycheck Fairness Act. It's really common sense. It would give workers stronger tools to combat wage discrimination, bar retaliation against workers for discussing salary information, and help ensure more adequate compensation for victims of gender-based pay discrimination. Mr. President, I am fortunate. I have 5 children. My oldest is a girl, my daughter. Wonderful. She was a good student. Wonderful, wonderful daughter. No one could be a better daughter than my daughter, Lana. So she had graduated from college. She came to Washington to spend some time with her parents before she decided what she wanted to do permanently. She went around looking for a job on Capitol Hill. Every person that she interviewed with, first thing they said, do you type? Now, can you imagine that? She could type, but what kind of how do you start a debate with that? They asked her that because she's a woman. Could you type? Women get an unfair shake in modern-day America, and we're trying to do something about it. We want workers to have stronger tools to combat wage discrimination. We want to bar retaliation against workers for discussing salary information. You know, some people get fired because they have gone around and found out that a man working the same job makes a lot more money than they did. They fired just for even another employee telling them what they made. We also want this Paycheck Fairness Bill to pass because it would help ensure more adequate compensation for victims of gender-based pay discrimination. Mr. President, today women make up nearly half of the workforce. An increasing number of women are primary wage earners for their families. Mr. President, I went to law school here in Washington. I went to a good school, George Washington University. I can only recall one woman in our class. There could have been more, but I remember the one. There may have been two. There may have been three. I don't think so. Now over half the women in law schools in America are women. And there's no reason that a woman graduating from law school should get paid less than a man graduating from law school doing the same work. Today, women make up nearly half of the workforce. I just indicated that. An increasing number of women are the primary wage earners for the families. And you can tell that by what's going on in college. More than half the women in college are women. So this problem affects women, children, families across the country, and it really does. With the economy struggling and families stretching every dollar, closing the pay gap is more important than ever. No woman working to support herself or her family should be paid less than her male counterparts. They're doing the same job. They should be paid the same. Some employers, Mr. President, have taken advantage of women, knowing they'll work for less. You've got maybe a single parent. Why don't we have to be here what we pay him? Now, with all this going on, with the examples I've given, the Republicans are filibustering this bill. They won't even let us vote on it. But what's new? They have filibustered even things they agree with. They don't agree with this. They don't want women to make the same amount of money. But they're filibustering this. They are filibustering even letting us get on the bill. They're filibustering what is called a motion to proceed, rule that I think needs to be changed in this body and will someday. They're filibustering the Paycheck Fairness Act. Legislation would help even the playing field for women in the workplace. If it seems unbelievable Republicans would block such a common sense measure, consider their track record in this Congress. Republicans blocked legislation to hire more teachers, cops, firefighters, and first responders. They blocked that. They stalled important jobs measures like the aviation bill. The FAA bill, Mr. President, had 22 extensions. We finally got it done, but it was so hard. Closed down the FAA on one occasion for a week. The highway bill has been stalled for months. It's in conference now. They oppose legislation to restore basic fairness to our tax code. What does that mean? Mr. President, we agree with the American people. About 80% of the American people feel that someone making more than $1 million a year should pay more than somebody making $100,000 a year, but not our Republican friends. So they've opposed legislation to restore basic fairness to our tax code. They've twice derailed attempts to stop interest rates on student loans from doubling, putting an affordable education risk for 7 million students. Mr. President, what I'm saying here is that if we don't get something done by the end of this month, student loans, a large number of them, so-called Stafford loans, will from 3.5%, 3.4% to 6.8%. Double it. They've stopped that twice. They put women's life at risk by holding the Violence Against Women Act in limbo over a hyper-technical issue. And when I say hyper-technical, I mean just that. We've passed what we've done here. They won't let us go to conference on it because it has a tax measure in it. Amounting to almost, by Washington standards, almost no money. A few $1 million. I know that's a lot, but is it a reason to stop this bill? Of course not. They've launched a series of attacks on women, their access to health care, even contraception. They have amassed an impressive record of obstruction, of being on the wrong side of almost every issue. Unfortunately, it seems paycheck fairness may have two strikes against it. Number one, it would be good for women and good for the economy. So Republicans are going to oppose it. Paycheck fairness is right for the country. But it appears Republicans will wind up on the wrong side of this issue as well, sending the message to little girls across the country that their work is less valuable because they happen to be born female. Mr. President, little kids are so impressionistic. I hope that everybody in the country saw the picture that appeared in major newspapers around the country last week. There was a man who had served as a United States Marine in the White House. It's an important job, helping provide security of the White House for 2 years. And traditional Democratic presidents, Republican presidents, when they finish their tour, they bring that person and their family into the Oval Office to say thanks and goodbye. Well, the man that came in, as represented in these pictures, had 2 children, wife and 2 children. He had a little 5-year-old boy, cute little kid, all dressed in a tie. And the president asked the boys if they had a question. He had a big brother that was 9 or 10 years old. And the little boy had a question, the honesty of a 5-year-old. And the president couldn't hear him the first time. He said, "What did you say?" He said, "Is your hair like mine?" The little African-American boy. "Is your hair like mine?" I'm sure this little boy, I don't know, but I'm sure that people had questioned his hair. And he wanted to know if the President of the United States had hair just like his. And the President said, he leaned over and says, "Dude, feel it." And when he felt his hair, he said, "It's just like mine." Mr. President, doesn't that speak volumes about the little children? And that's what I'm talking about here. This little boy knew that even though his hair was different than everybody's hair he went to school with, he could be president just like the man that he was able to feel his hair. And what I said here today, Mr. President, is that it appears Republicans will wind up on the wrong side of this issue that we talked about, paycheck fairness, sending the message to little girls across the country that their work is less valuable because they happen to be born female. I just hope Republicans will change. They're not going to. We all know that. But hope lies eternal. Would the chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I'd like to start out this afternoon by calling attention to what appears to be a pretty serious disconnect over at the White House between the President's legislative advisors and his political team. For weeks, President Obama's been running around ginning up college students and late-night television audience over an impending interest rate change on college loans, pointing the finger at Republicans. But not only are Republicans supportive of solving this problem, we're the only ones who've actually passed legislation to do so. House Republicans passed a bill weeks ago that would have preserved current rates, and late last week, Speaker Boehner, Leader Cantor, Senator Kyl, and I sent a joint letter to the President proposing multiple solutions to the problem that were thoughtfully and carefully designed to gain the President's support. In fact, the solutions were based on the President's own proposals. Let me say that again. We sent a letter to the President advocating continuing the current rate for another year and proposed pay-fors that he himself has endorsed. So you can imagine how surprised we were to see one of the President's political advisors say on one of the Sunday shows yesterday that Republicans in Congress are sitting on our hands, and an op-ed this morning by Education Secretary saying that Congress isn't lifting a finger to resolve the problem. So let's be very clear about all this. Republicans in Congress are the only ones actually working to solve the student loan issue. And unless the President isn't having his mail forwarded to him on the campaign trail, he knows it as well as I do. I couldn't help but notice the President's on a fundraising blitz in Manhattan today, and no doubt it's easier to walk into these events when you've got a good piece of fiction to sell about Republican obstructionism. But the President's campaign rhetoric is increasingly at odds with the reality. On the student loan issue, at least, it's Republicans who've been working on a solution, and the President who's been totally AWOL. All he has to do is pick up the phone and tell us which one of his own proposals he'll accept. It's that easy. But the truth is, the President doesn't really want to solve this problem. He seems to prefer the talking point, as disingenuous as it is. And speaking of talking points, it's been suggested by some on the President's political team that Republicans are rooting for economic failure. That is absolutely preposterous. If Republicans wanted failure, we'd support this President's misguided policies. But the larger point is this. We'll never solve any of these problems we face if the President continues to put his need for campaign rhetoric ahead of finding bipartisan solutions. And whether it's pretending that small ball, Post-it note quality proposals would have a major impact on the economy, or pretending that Republicans, who are the only ones actually working on bipartisan solutions, are somehow sitting on our hands, he's doing a major disservice to the American people. For the good of the country, it's time for the President to take yes for an answer. It's long, long past time for the President to lead. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
We're in a quorum call here in the Senate. They're back after a week's break, and they're going to resume work on the Paycheck Fairness Act that's dealing with gender-based pay discrimination. The measure would make it illegal for employers to retaliate against employees for sharing salary information. Debate on that today with votes on the measure expected tomorrow. And at 5 o'clock Eastern today, the Senate's going to take up the nomination of Timothy Hillman to be a federal district court judge in Massachusetts, and a vote on his nomination is expected around 5:30. Also this afternoon, over on our companion network, C-SPAN, the Atlantic Council will hold a discussion on Europe's financial crisis and how to get out of it. We'll hear from the CEO of Deutsche Bank on the actions taken so far and his thoughts for the future economic outlook in Europe. And again, that's at 5 o'clock Eastern Time on C-SPAN. And then President Obama fundraising in New York with former President Bill Clinton tonight at a trio of campaign fundraisers. They'll be speaking at a high-dollar fundraiser at a private home, then headlining a gala at the Waldorf Astoria, which you can watch on our companion network C-SPAN starting at 8:25. And they'll end the night at an event dubbed Barack on Broadway at the New Amsterdam Theater.
President.
Senator from Arizona.
Are we in a quorum call at the moment?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent that further proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr.